Hi there, my name is Dan St. Pierre, and welcome to this video series called All One, the United Anatomy of Being. And welcome on this journey towards a greater understanding of the wholeness and oneness of being. In this series, I will be exploring and explaining the four primary parts of being. This includes the body or the physical level, the mind or the separating energy level, and the heart or the uniting energy level, which will all help demonstrate what the non-physical soul or our highest level of pure being is. I will explore and explain the inextricable connectivity of these parts, which should provide a better and fuller understanding of the wholeness of being, or what I call the united anatomy of being. And in the process, I hope to share an improved understanding of unity consciousness and spirituality, the importance and power of it, and how it leads to greater success, better outcomes, and ultimately much greater happiness in life. But to get to this full understanding, there is again a required understanding of all the parts of being, because we exist simultaneously on a physical level, a separating energy level, a uniting energy level, and a non-physical or spiritual level, whether we are aware of it or not. And there is a hierarchy to these levels. As awareness or consciousness rises through each, the greater the power potential for, again, improved existence, highly improved experiences, and maybe most importantly, improved overall happiness in life. To demonstrate the power of rising consciousness, let's take a moment to provide a brief example and consider early humans who existed as primarily physical level beings for a few 100,000 years prior to the development of the mind level and mind consciousness. Before this, early humans existed just like other animals. Sure, their minds were very slowly developing as they picked up sticks and stones as rudimentary tools, found natural shelter for protection, or threw animal skins over themselves for rudimentary clothing. But early humans still lived much more like all other animals before fully entering the mind consciousness phase of existence around the discovery of agriculture. And they constantly struggled to survive, roaming the earth looking for food and trying to avoid harm and death. But as humans exploded onto the mind level and mind consciousness with the discovery of agriculture, not in replacement of, but in addition to the physical level on which they dominantly existed for so long, life changed rapidly and very differently compared to all other life on Earth. And rather swiftly, an immense amount of physical level survival challenges and problems were progressively solved. And really in no time at all, there was suddenly readily available food, progressively better protection from the elements, and better protection from harm and death. And look where we have come as a species in the 10 to 12,000 years since. Now, similarly, and I think this is extremely important, just as humans could not have solved their physical level survival challenges without the development of the mind and their foray into mind level consciousness, we now will not well solve the current problems that have resulted from that development without a better understanding of how the mind works and simultaneously continued development and consciousness of our higher levels of being, which is the heart and the soul. Now, exploring and understanding these higher levels, or all of the levels really that make up the wholeness of being, is often referred to as spirituality or unity consciousness. And spirituality and unity consciousness are nothing more than understanding or being aware of all that we are. All of the parts of our being, how they function together, and thus the wholeness of who we fully and truly are. And there's great power in that knowledge. However, while rather simple once the understanding is gained, the process of gaining it is often not easy unless one has been fortunate enough to have a direct personal experience with these higher and more subtle levels. Therefore, it often takes decades of study and practice to recognize that there is much more to being than this physical world around us, our own physicalness, our ability to think, and our ability to affect this physical experience. But the process can undoubtedly be confusing along the way. And there are a few reasons for this that I think are worth understanding. First, when learning anything without direct experience, there is a lot of information that can be difficult to grasp or even believe, depending on background and past experience. For example, have you ever tried to teach a grandparent or even an aging parent how to use a computer or the internet or maybe a smartphone? It's really hard for them to grasp because they have lived the majority of their lives without this technology. And maybe in a slightly more extreme but also more relevant example, imagine explaining a smartphone to someone who lived 500 years ago. They would have no clue what you were talking about and would think you were off the wall nuts. But if you could show them somehow, rather than trying to tell them, and they could directly experience it for themselves, they would likely grasp rather quickly what it is, how to use it, and the powerful benefit of it. The same is true in the process of learning and beginning to understand higher consciousness and the wholeness of being. Second, the spiritual journey is like traversing down a funnel with only one possible destination. But that one possible destination of singularity in the unity of the non-physical level and the non-physical source of being, and really the unity of everything, is actually indescribable. This will be explained with some simple examples later in the series. But when we arrive at the singularity of everything, beyond the heart level, beyond the mind level, and beyond the physical level, where differentiation and separation can no longer exist, words also cannot and do not exist. And this may sound very strange, but it is true, and again will be explained in more detail later. But basically, words are of the mind and the mind level, created and used, of course, with great benefit to describe all the differentiated and seemingly separated things in existence. When moving beyond the mind, and thus beyond the duality of the mind towards singularity of being, there is only one thing. And where there is only one thing with nothing else to compare to or differentiate it from, descriptions can no longer exist. So singularity truly is indescribable. However, to share, guide, or teach this indescribable singularity or oneness, words, of course, must be used. And then there is a very high potential for confusion when using any words to describe or try to articulate the indescribable. Third, and it's really similar to the first reason, but the journey towards singularity can be very different depending on the starting point or the point of reference. So I just used a funnel as an analogy, but we could also use the analogy of a tree, where traversing from any branch will lead to the inevitable destination of the trunk. But the journey from a branch on one side of the tree will be very different than the journey from a branch on the other side of the tree. So describing or even prescribing a journey toward the same destination might not be relevant, comprehensible, or even effective, depending on where one is starting from. And this is true for both the guide or the teacher and the student or the one striving to learn and understand. Fourth, while there are many teachers, guides, gurus, or mystics, both contemporary or over the past several thousands of years, who have directly and fully experienced the oneness of existence and the pure source of all being, and thus are well positioned to guide or teach the path, there are also many who have not. Some teachers have experienced glimpses or revelations on their own journey, while not having fully experienced the singularity, unity, or oneness of all being. And yet they are trying to guide a path, or maybe a portion of the path, without knowing it in its entirety. And saying this is by no means to criticize the less fully experienced teachers, because there, of course, is great value learning how to get from one step to the next along the way. But it's just another reason why the journey toward the full understanding of the oneness of being has the potential to be confusing, and maybe more importantly, the potential to get frustrating, and then possibly lead to the abandonment of even trying to learn and understand. But there is such great power in this higher consciousness. So it's important to understand why it's confusing, so maybe you can more easily move past that confusion and keep going. But for all of these reasons, again, it often takes decades to come to a mental understanding of unity consciousness, the singularity of existence, and the united anatomy of being. And it often takes many different resources to sift through the confusion along the way and then gain clarity, or for all of this just to become clearer in your own being and in your own mind. And ultimately, understanding in the mind is not enough to truly know. The understanding really doesn't occur in the mind. The mind will grasp it eventually. Eventually it takes your higher levels of consciousness. But the mind is almost always the starting point, and it is a great starting point. To truly know beyond any doubt requires a direct personal experience, most easily gained by stilling the mind in some sort of meditative practice. However, like planting a seed and then awaiting a harvest, or lifting a dumbbell to strengthen a muscle, one is less likely to pursue the effort, or in this case, the effortless effort, towards a direct personal experience without knowing in the mind that a benefit will surely come. But the process toward understanding really need not take decades. In my own journey, I've become acutely aware of the time investment required to sift through this inevitable confusion toward understanding and towards a direct personal experience. I have certainly been confused along the way, and I often wished for a simpler, more comprehensive and accelerated process for gaining understanding. And when I say this, I again mean understanding in the mind, because the deeper understanding in the heart, or connecting directly to the soul, or the fully united one source of all being, really can't be taught. It can only be experienced personally. And any human, any and every human is capable of this direct experience to the united source of being. So my goal in this series is to simply but comprehensively explore and demonstrate the parts of our being. Simply but comprehensively explore the inextricable connectivity of those parts. And simply but comprehensively explore the unity, singularity, and wholeness of being. And the hope is that this will accelerate the understanding in the mind for anyone interested in learning, and provide that mental knowledge that might encourage a deeper personal process towards a direct experience. So this series, which will be about 50 episodes, will start with some prerequisite information to help facilitate the primary content. And the first few videos may feel a little tutorial or even obvious to some of you, particularly if you are already on this path or have some experience. But nonetheless, it is important as a refresher, and maybe particularly for those who are just stepping on to this path of understanding. Then in part one, called The Body, the Soul, and the Whole, I will explore and explain some important knowledge humans have gained over the centuries and even millenniums about the physical world. And this will be used to explore and demonstrate the non-physical soul, or the united level of pure being. And I will then explore a model of physical motion on the physical level, and the separating and dualistic nature of the mind, which will all culminate in an explanation, illustration, and a master map of the full anatomy of being. Then, in part two, called The Mind, the Language of the Body, I will explore a bit of anthropology to demonstrate humans' evolution from physical level beings to mind level or mind-dominated beings. In this process, I will explore where we came from as a species, where we are now, and where we're heading if we successfully traverse this natural arcing trajectory of physical level motion, which again will be explained in part one. I will then further explore and explain more specifics of the mind and how it functions, including thought drivers like memory, perception, perspective, beliefs, values, and vision, which really affect us every single day. I will also cover a bit of psychology, and this will be important to understand how our minds consciously, subconsciously, and unconsciously affect our actions, thoughts, and feelings every moment of our lives. And this will also be critical in understanding how to relieve suffering and highly increase happiness. Because while invaluable for our past, current, and future success as both individuals and a species, and really invaluable toward any understanding, the mind's primary nature is dualistic. And without understanding this, the mind can be a complete inhibition to spirituality and an inhibition to the benefits of higher consciousness, and really an inhibition to our success and overall happiness, both individually and as a species. Then, in the final part of this series called The Heart, Language of the Soul, I will explore and explain the heart level. And the heart level is an extremely important part of being. And understanding it is critical on any journey towards singularity, improved success, and greater happiness. I would like to point out here that the heart level is a part of being that is often overlooked by many spiritual teachers and guides, who tend to focus more on the mind-body connection or the body-mind-spirit connection. Fortunately, the heart as its own critical level does seem to be gaining more attention from some of the leading resources on consciousness and spirituality, which I think is wonderful. But one cannot understand or even grasp full unity consciousness without understanding the heart level, because it is the level of being that exists in between the mind and the soul. Like the mind is the dominant language of the body or the physical level, the heart is the dominant language of the soul or the non-physical level. And the heart only has two primary fundamental feelings, either connection to or separation from the non-physical source of all being. But that primary fundamental feeling makes all the difference in the world in how we feel. It makes all the difference in the world in how we think. It makes all the difference in the world in how we act and react. And therefore, that primary fundamental feeling makes all the difference in the world in our existence, experiences, outcomes, success, and overall happiness. By understanding the full anatomy of being, all its parts, and how they operate together while existing simultaneously, anyone who is interested in learning the wholeness of being, the singularity of existence, or spirituality can accelerate their understanding. There will still be additional resources likely required to validate and solidify your understanding. Or if you are already on this path, this series may be the validation and solidification of understanding that you need. Because either way, with only one inevitable destination on the path to spirituality and unity consciousness, all fully informed teachers, guides, and mystics are simply saying the exact same thing, but with different words. And sometimes it requires different words trying to explain the same thing for that understanding to really sink in. So I invite you to join me and journey down the funnel toward an understanding of the simplicity of unity consciousness, singularity, and the oneness of being. I can't assure you that each video will feel simple to understand. Seeing the full picture requires putting the puzzle pieces together. But the images on some of the pieces must first be dusted off and revealed. What I can assure you is that the entire puzzle will be assembled and become clear by the end. And the benefit will be a much greater understanding of what, why, and who you are. The power to utilize all the parts of your being instead of perhaps just your body and mind. Improved clarity on what you want from life. Improved capability for success. Improved understanding, tolerance, kindness, and love in what often seems like a complex and crazy world. And ultimately, highly improved experiences, peacefulness, and happiness. So thank you very much for joining me, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next episode.